The first taste of blood was metallic and sharp in the patient's mouth. Anya saw it before he even realized, a faint pink froth at the corner of his lips as he coughed, a wet, ragged sound that echoed with the rattle of fluid in his lungs. "Stay with me, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice a calm island in the roaring sea of the downtown General ER. She moved with an economy of motion that belied the frantic energy around her hands sure as she adjusted the non-rebreather mask on his face. The monitor above his bed screamed a frantic, high-pitched rhythm, his heart rate soaring, while his oxygen saturation, the all-important O2 sat, tumbled into the low 80s. Critical. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a phantom limb she'd learned to ignore during shifts. But it buzzed again, insistent. A quick glance at the clock told her it was 9 p.m. It would be him, her landlord. Amid the chaos of saving Mr. Henderson's life, a different kind of panic, cold and familiar, slithered up her spine. A text preview flashed on her screen, stark against a photo of her smiling parents. "Anya, rent is now 5 days late. We need to talk." Just breathe, she told herself, her own advice a bitter irony as she watched her patient struggle for air. Focus, one crisis at a time. Suddenly, the ambulance bay doors flew open with a pneumatic hiss, admitting a gust of cool night air and a new wave of urgency. Two paramedics hustled a gurney past the triage desk, their movements swift and practiced. "Got a John Doe for you," the lead medic shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "Found him in an alley downtown. Severe dyspnea. History of asthma per the bracelet on his wrist. Vitals are crashing." Anya's head snapped up. Her assigned resident was busy with a multi-car pile-up victim. The charge nurse was buried in paperwork. That left her. As the gurney clattered to a stop in the bay next to Mr. Henderson's, she got her first look at him. He was young, maybe 24 or 25, but looked as if life had scraped him hollow. His clothes were threadbare, his face gaunt and pale under a layer of city grime. His breaths were shallow, rapid-fire gasps, a desperate fight for oxygen. But what struck Anya, what cut through the clinical assessment, were his eyes. Wide with fear, they darted around the overwhelming environment, but in their depths, there was a startling clarity, an intelligence that seemed utterly at odds with his destitute appearance. He clutched a worn, leather-bound sketchbook to his chest. Like a shield, his knuckles white. He had no wallet, no phone, nothing to name him or claim him. He was a ghost. Anya switched gears instantly, her training taking over. She grabbed a stethoscope, her mind compartmentalizing the beeping of Mr. Henderson's monitor, the silent threat of the eviction notice in her pocket, and the immediate, life-threatening needs of the nameless young man in front of her. "I've got him," she called out, her voice ringing with a confidence she didn't feel. As she leaned in to listen to his lungs, she heard the terrifying, wheezing rattle of constricted airways. This was bad. This was life and death, happening right now. And in the back of her mind, a single, terrifying number glowed like a warning light. $508.42. The entire contents of her world. The diagnosis came fast, a grim confirmation of the sounds Anya had heard through her stethoscope. Liam, as he was now known, a John Doe temporarily christened by the intake clerk, had severe galloping bacterial pneumonia. For a normal person, it was dangerous. For someone with his history of asthma, it was a death sentence waiting to be signed. His already inflamed airways were filling with fluid, and each breath was a losing battle. Dr. Evans, the harried ER resident, pulled Anya aside after looking at the chest x-ray. The image was horrifying, a milky white storm cloud obscuring the dark, healthy space of his lungs. "He needs a bronchoscopy, stat," Evans said, rubbing his tired eyes. "We need to get in there, clear out the gunk, and wash the airways with a targeted antibiotic. It's the only thing that'll turn this around quickly." "I'll prep him," Anya said, already moving toward the supply closet. "Hold on," Evans said, stopping her with a hand on her arm. He gestured grimly toward the computer screen. "No insurance, no ID, no ability to pay. He's flagged in the system." He sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of 1,000 similar conversations. "It's a non-emergent, life-saving procedure." The phrase was a masterpiece of bureaucratic doublespeak, a linguistic shield the hospital used to protect its bottom line. It meant that while Liam would surely die without the procedure, he wouldn't die in the next 60 seconds, so the hospital wasn't legally obligated to perform it for free. Basic stabilization, oxygen, IV fluids, a broad-spectrum antibiotic that wasn't working, was all they were required to provide. "What does that mean?" Anya asked, though she already knew. "It means we stabilize and transfer to county," Evans said, his voice flat. "The procedure costs $5,000. My hands are tied." Anya's blood ran cold. County Hospital was underfunded, overwhelmed, and a 2-hour ambulance ride away in good traffic. Liam didn't have 2 hours. She looked over at him. He was shivering now, a fever taking hold. He had managed to whisper that his name was Liam, nothing more. He followed her with those intelligent, frightened eyes, placing a desperate, silent trust in her. The fire of injustice and emotion Anya was becoming all too familiar with began to burn in her chest. She found the floor's social worker, a perpetually stressed woman named Maria, who confirmed the resident's prognosis. "Any kind of charity application, any emergency funding? It would take weeks to get approved, Anya. There's nothing I can do tonight." Weeks? Liam had hours. She decided to go over the resident's head. It was a risk, but she had to try. She found Dr. Mark Jennings, the senior attending surgeon, holding court at the Central Nurses Station, a small retinue of interns hanging on his every word. He was a man who enjoyed his own authority, known for his pristine surgical record and his complete lack of bedside manner. "Dr. Jennings," Anya began, keeping her voice steady and professional, presenting the facts of Liam's case, the rapid decline, the uselessness of the current treatment. "He won't survive the transfer to county. We need to do the bronchoscopy here." Jennings didn't even grant her the courtesy of looking up from the chart he was reviewing. He waved a dismissive hand. "Nurse Sharma, Downtown General is a business, not a philanthropic society. We are not in the habit of performing $5,000 procedures on vagrants. The protocol is clear, and it exists for a reason: to protect this hospital from financial ruin at the hands of people who do not contribute to the system." His voice was laced with a chilling, arrogant condescension. He finally lifted his eyes, not to meet hers, but to look past her. "Do not bring this to me again. You are a nurse. Confine yourself to nursing." He turned back to his interns, leaving Anya standing in the middle of the bustling ER, feeling as if she'd been slapped. The word vagrant echoed in her ears. She looked at Liam, who was now coughing weakly, his sketchbook slipping from his grasp. She saw a human being drowning on dry land. Dr. Jennings saw a liability. That was the moment something inside her snapped. The years of swallowing her frustration, of watching patients get substandard care because of their bank balance, of feeling helpless in the face of a monstrously indifferent system, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of defiance. She walked to a quiet corner of the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled out her phone. The screen glowed with the damning number. 508 bars, 42 hours. It was her rent money, her grocery money, the fragile buffer between her and utter destitution. She thought of her car's rattling engine, the student loan payment that was due next week. Then she looked through the glass of Liam's bay. He was fighting, but his body was failing. She remembered something she'd overheard months ago, a hushed conversation from a billing clerk about a policy almost no one used. A $500 hardship down payment. It was a relic from a more compassionate era, a way for working-class families to initiate a procedure while they figured out how to pay the rest. It wasn't meant for a John Doe. It wasn't meant for this. Using it this way was a gross violation of every rule. It was career suicide. Her thumb hovered over her banking app. It was an insane, reckless, and deeply irresponsible idea. It was also the only thing she could think of to do. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she walked away from the ER, her footsteps echoing with a finality she couldn't comprehend. She went down 2 floors to the billing department, a cold, quiet office that felt like the hospital's icy heart. The clerk behind the glass was a young woman with bright pink nails, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone bored. Anya's voice was barely a whisper. "I need to make a hardship payment for the John Doe in ER bed 7. The clerk's brow furrowed. She typed something into her computer. The bronchoscopy? That's 5 grand. A hardship payment is for, like, a copay. Please, Anya said, her voice cracking. Just run it as a down payment. Please. The clerk sighed, a dramatic put-upon sound. This is really weird. I'm probably going to get in trouble for this. But she turned the card reader toward Anya. Anya's hand trembled as she slid her debit card into the slot. The machine beeped, a shrill, final sound. She entered her PIN, her fingers feeling clumsy and foreign. Approved. The word flashed green on the tiny screen. The clerk handed her a flimsy receipt. It felt impossibly heavy in her hand. It read, paid $509. Remaining balance, $4,500. At that exact moment, her phone buzzed. A text from her bank. Your account balance is now $8.42. A wave of nausea and terror washed over her. She had just set herself on fire to keep a stranger warm. Walking back to the elevator, she felt a strange, terrifying calm settle over her. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had chosen her patient over her career, her compassion over her own survival. She had done the right thing, and she knew with absolute certainty that it was going to destroy her. The system, for all its bureaucratic inertia, moved with surprising speed once money was involved. The $500 payment, miscoded by the indifferent clerk as a standard deposit, removed the financial hold on Liam's account. An automated notification pinged the respiratory department. A tech was scheduled. Dr. Jennings, seeing the hold was lifted and assuming a family member had finally shown up with a credit card, proceeded with the bronchoscopy without a second thought. But the transaction also triggered another, more ominous alert. It landed in the inbox of David Harrison, the hospital's chief financial officer. Harrison was a man who viewed the hospital not as a place of healing, but as a complex financial machine. His singular purpose was to optimize that machine for profit. Compassion was a variable he had long since eliminated from his equations. He saw the alert, a $5,000 procedure initiated for a John Doe uninsured on the back of a meager $500 payment. It was the exact kind of fiscal hemorrhage he was hired to prevent. His jaw tightened. He drilled down into the transaction details, his eyes narrowing as he saw the name on the debit card. Anya Sharma, RN. A nurse. A nurse had defied his carefully constructed financial protocols. This wasn't just a mistake. It was an insurrection. A cold fury, precise and venomous, settled over him. He picked up his phone and made 2 calls. One to Dr. Jennings, the other to Karen O'Connell, the charge nurse on Anya's floor. Anya was at the nurse's station, updating a chart, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach when she saw them coming. Harrison led the way, a storm cloud in a tailored suit. Flanking him were Dr. Jennings, his face a mask of indignation, and a pale, nervous Karen. They stopped directly in front of her desk, creating a semicircle of judgment that drew the eyes of everyone in the ER. The ambient noise seemed to hush, replaced by a thick, heavy silence. Nurse Sharma, Harrison began, his voice low and dangerous, each word a perfectly polished stone of contempt. I've just been made aware of your extracurricular financial activities. Do you have any earthly idea what you have done? Anya's mouth went dry. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I made a down payment so a patient could get the care he needed. Dr. Jennings scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. You played God is what you did. You circumvented established medical and financial protocol in the most unprofessional, reckless act I have ever witnessed in my career. You are a nurse. You do not make $5,000 decisions. Period. Anya, I told you, Karen said, her voice wavering, refusing to meet Anya's eyes. We have rules for a reason. You can't just do whatever you want. You have to protect the hospital. You have to protect yourself. The public nature of the humiliation was a deliberate strategy. Harrison wanted to make an example of her, to cauterize this pocket of rebellion before it could spread. The eyes of her colleagues were on her, some with pity, some with a touch of fear, some with a grim "I told you so" satisfaction. For a moment, Anya felt herself shrink under the weight of their judgment. Then the image of Liam, gasping for air, flashed in her mind. The righteous fire from before, banked by fear, roared back to life. She lifted her chin and looked directly at Harrison, her voice shaking but clear. His oxygen was at 84% and falling. He was going into respiratory failure. We have a legal and a moral duty of care. So you tell me, Mr. Harrison, what is the protocol for letting a man die when you have the ability to save him? What line on your spreadsheet accounts for a human life? The direct challenge stunned Harrison into a moment of silence. Then his eyes narrowed into slits. You are brazenly insubordinate, he snarled. You are suspended, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. And I assure you, Ms. Sharma, I will be consulting with our legal department to explore every possible avenue to hold you personally and financially responsible for the full cost of this unauthorized procedure. Before the two burly security guards arrived, their presence a final, crushing statement of her disgrace, Anya had one last thing to do. She walked past the triumvirate of her accusers and slipped into Liam's recovery bay. The procedure was done. He was still sedated, a tube down his throat, but the change was miraculous. The violent shivering was gone. A healthy pink color had returned to his cheeks. The frantic beep of the monitor had settled into a steady, rhythmic pulse. He was alive. His eyes fluttered open and focused on her. He had heard the shouting. He knew. He weakly lifted a hand, and a nearby nurse, seeing the exchange, handed him his sketchbook and a pen. With a trembling, uncertain hand, he scrawled 2 words on a blank page. Thank you. He held it up for her to see. In that moment, looking at his raw gratitude, Anya felt a conviction that transcended the fear. She had done the right thing. As the security guards gently but firmly took her by the elbows to lead her away, past the staring eyes of her former colleagues, and out into the cold night, that image of his grateful eyes and his shaky handwriting was the only thing she had left. The following days were a descent into a gray, featureless hell. Anya stayed in her small apartment, the eviction notice on her door a constant, mocking reminder of her folly. The official letter of suspension arrived, cold and clinical. It was followed by a notification of a mandatory hearing with the state nursing board to review her conduct, a hearing that could result in the permanent revocation of her license. She ate ramen noodles, the salty broth doing little to fill the hollow pit of anxiety in her stomach. She had exactly $4.17 left after buying the cheap noodles, not even enough for a bus pass. She ignored the increasingly frantic calls from her parents, ashamed and unable to articulate the magnitude of her failure. Her life, her career, the future she had worked so tirelessly to build, had been demolished in a single $500 act of compassion. She would lie awake at night, the silence of her apartment amplifying her fears. She wasn't just fired. She was ruined. She was untouchable. Who would ever hire a nurse who was not only fired, but was being sued by her former hospital? Meanwhile, back at Downtown General, Liam was recovering, but he remained a frustrating enigma. He was polite, but stubbornly silent about his past. The hospital administration, now desperate to close the loop on this administrative nightmare, followed protocol for an unidentified patient and called the LAPD. 2 officers, jaded and overworked, arrived to question him. Their demeanor was one of pure skepticism. They saw the worn clothes, the lack of ID, and made an instant judgment. To them, Liam was just another piece of the city's human debris, a transient trying to scam the system for a warm bed and a few meals. Look, son, let's make this easy, the older officer said, his tone patronizing. We just need a name, an address. You got family we can call, or you want us to run your prints and see what we find? Liam, deeply distrustful of any form of authority, simply shook his head. I'm nobody, he said, his voice still raspy. Right. Nobody, the officer said, sighing with exasperation. Fine, we'll do it the hard way. They took his fingerprints, the process sterile and impersonal, treating him more like a suspect than a patient. One of the officers took the scanner back to their patrol car to run the prints through the statewide and national databases. He expected to find a string of petty misdemeanors, vagrancy, maybe shoplifting, or nothing at all. He leaned back in his seat, sipping a lukewarm coffee as the system searched. Then the result flashed on his laptop screen. His eyes widened. He sat bolt upright, sloshing coffee onto his uniform. This couldn't be right. He was looking at a sealed juvenile record heavily flagged with privacy warnings at the federal level. And beside it, a name. Liam Vance. Attached was a priority notification, the kind reserved for politicians and billionaires. In case of emergency, primary contact is Julian Vance. The officer stared at the screen, his mind struggling to connect the dots. Julian Vance. The Julian Vance, the reclusive mega-billionaire founder of Zenith, the global e-commerce empire. The man who owned half of Seattle and was rapidly buying up the rest of the world. He looked through his windshield at the drab, institutional facade of downtown General Hospital. Then he looked at the name on the screen again. Holy, he breathed, fumbling for his radio. He didn't call his supervisor. This was above his supervisor. He called the watch commander directly. "Sir," he said, his voice suddenly tight, with a level of stress he hadn't felt in years. "You are not going to believe this." The entire world was about to pivot on its axis, and the epicenter of the earthquake was a quiet hospital room on the 3rd floor. The response was not a phone call, it was a silent, overwhelming invasion. Less than an hour after the officer's frantic radio call, a fleet of 5 black identical SUVs with deeply tinted windows swept up to the hospital's main entrance. They didn't park in the visitor lot. They created their own valet line, blocking the ambulance bay with an aura of absolute authority. Doors opened in unison, and a team of men and women in impeccably tailored dark suits emerged. They moved with the quiet, predatory efficiency of a wolf pack. Leading them was a woman in her late 40s with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. This was Eleanor Vance's former chief of staff, now serving her husband in the same capacity. She entered the lobby, and the hospital's chaotic energy seemed to bend around her, the staff instinctively falling silent and parting to let her pass. David Harrison, alerted by a panicked call from hospital security, scrambled down from his executive suite to meet them, his face slick with a sudden, clammy sweat. Dr. Jennings, who had been preening about his successful handling of a complex case, happened to be in the lobby and froze, recognizing the power on display. "I am the chief of staff from Mr. Julian Vance," the woman announced, her voice as cold and clear as ice water, leaving no room for argument or doubt. "We are here for Liam Vance. Take me to him now." The name hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. Vance, David Harrison felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. His mind replayed the scene in the ER with horrifying clarity. Unauthorized procedure, vagrant, financial liability. He looked at the formidable woman and her team of corporate soldiers, and the full, cataclysmic scale of his blunder crashed down upon him. He hadn't just mistreated a patient. He had abused, humiliated, and threatened the career of a nurse who had saved the secret son of one of the most powerful and reclusive men on the planet. Julian Vance arrived himself a short time later, slipping in through a private entrance secured by his team. He was as imposing as his legend suggested, a man carved from granite and ambition. He was escorted to Liam's room, a place he hadn't willingly entered in over 3 years. The reunion was thick with the frost of old wounds. Julian looked at his son, not with the relief of a worried father, but with the deep, world-weary annoyance of a CEO whose prize asset has malfunctioned. "Liam," he said, his voice devoid of warmth, "what have you gotten yourself into this time?" Liam, propped up against his pillows, looked stronger, but his eyes were filled with a familiar pain. He turned his head and stared at the blank wall, refusing to acknowledge his father. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. Julian ignored him, turning to his chief of staff. "Get the transfer team ready. I want him at Cedars-Sinai within the hour. The best of everything." A private medical team, already on standby, began to wheel in advanced equipment. But as they approached his bed, Liam found his voice. "No," he said. It was quiet, but it cut through the room. Julian looked at him, surprised. "Don't be ridiculous. This place is a cesspool." "This cesspool saved my life," Liam retorted, his gaze finally snapping to meet his father's, a spark of defiance in his eyes. A nurse here saved my life. She was here when I was dying. Where were you? The question was a direct hit, a challenge Liam had never dared to make before. It hung in the air, a stunning accusation. He refused to be moved. He demanded to know what had happened to the nurse. He remembered her name. Anya. Julian's PR team, already working to contain the story, quickly unearthed the details of Anya's heroism and Harrison's subsequent retribution. They understood the narrative immediately, and it was a public relations nightmare. Billionaire's son, left for dead, saved by a broke nurse who was then fired and sued by Calais Hospital. It was a story that could tarnish the Zenith brand for years. Driven by the cold logic of damage control, Julian Vance made a decision. Find her, he commanded his chief of staff. Bring her here. Now. Anya was in her apartment, staring at a can of tuna and wondering how to stretch it into 3 meals when the knock came. It wasn't her landlord. It was a man in a suit so expensive it looked out of place in her entire building. He politely informed her that a car was waiting downstairs to take her to Downtown General, and that Mr. Julian Vance personally requested her presence. Numb with confusion, she was escorted back to the hospital she had been thrown out of just days before. This time, she wasn't led out in disgrace, but guided to the main executive conference room. The long mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lighting. At its head sat Julian Vance, to his side his chief of staff, and further down the table sat a pale, visibly trembling David Harrison. Against the far wall, standing like chastened schoolboys, were Dr. Jennings and Karen O'Connell. The moment Anya entered, Harrison shot to his feet, his face arranged in a mask of pathetic, desperate sincerity. Anya, Nurse Sharma, he began, his voice tripping over itself. Thank God you're here. There has been a truly catastrophic misunderstanding. A breakdown in communication from top to bottom. He was practically bowing. Your heroic dedication, your patient advocacy, it's an inspiration to us all. We are, of course, reinstating you immediately with full back pay. And a promotion. We'll create a position, Director of Nursing Education. Whatever you want. The hypocrisy was so thick, Anya felt she could choke on it. The audience that mattered, Julian Vance, was watching, and Harrison was performing for his life. Anya listened to the entire groveling speech without expression. When he was done, a pathetic, hopeful smile plastered on his face. She turned her gaze on him. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the room like a scalpel. A misunderstanding, Mr. Harrison? She said. Or a failure of morality? Let me ask you a question. She paused, letting the silence stretch. If the man in that bed was John Smith, a mechanic from Fresno, instead of Liam Vance, the son of a billionaire, would I be in this conference room right now? Or would I be at home with an eviction notice on my door and a letter from the nursing board in my hand? Harrison's face collapsed. He had no answer. Anya held his gaze for a moment longer before dismissing him entirely. I'm not interested in your promotion, she said, her voice ringing with finality. I resign. Julian Vance had been watching the exchange with the detached focus of a predator studying its prey. He was intrigued by this young woman's unbreakable spine. He saw a problem, and his entire life was about solving problems. He leaned forward. All right, Nurse Sharma, he said, his voice the calm, certain rumble of a man used to getting his way. A wrong was done. I will make it right. It's a simple transaction. I will pay off your student loans. In full. I will give you $1 million for your trouble and the damage to your reputation. We will sign an NDA and this all goes away. Name your price. Let's resolve this. He was offering her a fortune. He was offering her a new life free from the crushing weight of debt. He was offering her the very thing she had sacrificed. Anya looked away from the disgraced Harrison and the terrified Jennings and fixed her eyes on the most powerful man in the room. Her fear was gone, replaced by a clarity so absolute it felt like a physical force. I don't want your money, Mr. Vance, she said. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Julian Vance looked momentarily stunned. I want you to see what I see, Anya continued, her voice gaining strength. Your son, a kind, talented young man, was dismissed as a vagrant. He almost died because this hospital, the one you could buy with a rounding error in your bank account, saw him as a financial liability instead of a human being. He is alive today because of a $500 gamble made by a nurse who was about to lose her apartment. She took a breath, her gaze unwavering. So no, I don't want $1 million. Then she named her true price. I want you to establish a charitable foundation at this hospital, a permanent, fully endowed fund dedicated to covering the complete medical costs for anyone who walks through those doors and cannot pay. No applications, no red tape, no questions asked. It will be run by an independent board, free from the influence of men like Mr. Harrison. And, she added, delivering the final, brilliant stroke, it will be named the Eleanor Vance Foundation, after Liam's mother. She had not asked for wealth. She had demanded justice. She had not sought a reward. She had demanded a legacy. For the first time in a very long time, Julian Vance was speechless. Julian Vance, a man who had negotiated multi-billion-dollar deals and faced down hostile governments, was completely and utterly checkmated. He was cornered not by a corporate rival, but by the unassailable moral authority of a 28-year-old nurse. To refuse her terms now, especially with the PR storm brewing, was unthinkable. To accept them meant a public admission of the system's failure and his own son's near-death experience. Anya had left him no choice but to do the right thing. Done, he said, the single word sealing the fate of downtown General's culture. The announcement came the next day at a hastily assembled press conference. Julian Vance, looking somber and paternal, stood at a podium and announced the formation of the Eleanor Vance Foundation for Patient Care, endowed with an initial $50 million. He spoke of the wake-up call his family had experienced and the need for a more compassionate healthcare system. The fallout was swift and brutal. David Harrison was publicly fired, his career in healthcare administration over. The press release, crafted by Julian's PR team, cited a fundamental misalignment with the hospital's new core values of patient-centric care. Dr. Jennings was placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending a full peer review of his professional conduct. A quiet but decisive end to his reign of arrogance. In the midst of the upheaval, Karen O'Connell sought Anya out. She found her packing the few personal items from her locker, her resignation now official. The older nurse's face was etched with a shame that seemed to have aged her 10 years. Anya, she began, her voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was a coward. I got so caught up in the rules and just surviving each shift that I forgot why we do this. Tears welled in her eyes. You reminded me of the nurse I wanted to be a long time ago. Thank you. In Karen's apology, Anya saw not an enemy, but another victim of the same broken system. A different kind of healing was beginning in Liam's hospital room. The thaw between father and son was slow and awkward. Julian, clumsy in the language of emotion, started bringing gifts. Not expensive gadgets, but things that showed he was trying to see his son for the first time. One day he brought a set of professional-grade German charcoal pencils and a portfolio of heavy, textured drawing paper. He sat by Liam's bed and, for the first time, asked to see the old, battered sketchbook. He carefully turned the pages, his expression slowly changing from detached curiosity to stunned admiration. He saw the city through Liam's eyes, the deeply etched lines on a homeless veteran's face, the hopeful expression of a young street musician, the weary resilience of a waitress resting her feet. These weren't just sketches. They were soulful portraits filled with a profound empathy Julian had never known his son possessed. Your mother, Julian said, his voice cracking slightly as he looked at a drawing of a child sharing her sandwich with a stray dog. She used to draw. She would have been so proud of you, Liam. It was a fragile bridge across a vast chasm of neglect, but it was a start. The newly formed board of the Eleanor Vance Foundation, appointed by Julian, but with a list of candidates approved by Anya, offered her their first position, executive director. Anya was deeply hesitant. The idea of budgets and board meetings felt like a betrayal of her hands-on calling. I'm a nurse, not an administrator, she told Liam, who was now well on his way to a full recovery. Liam, looking healthier and more confident than she'd ever seen him, shook his head. You fought the system from the inside and almost lost everything, Anya, he said, his voice filled with conviction. Now you have the chance to rebuild it from the outside. Think of how many people you can save. Think of all the other John Does who won't have to depend on a broke nurse spending her last dollar. He was right. Her single act of defiance had given her the power to create 1,000 more acts of compassion. She accepted the position. 6 months later, the wing of Downtown General that housed the Eleanor Vance Foundation was unrecognizable. The grim, beige walls had been repainted in warm, soothing colors. The uncomfortable plastic chairs were gone, replaced by comfortable seating. Natural light streamed in through new, larger windows. It was a space designed for dignity. Anya walked through the waiting room, no longer in scrubs, but in a smart business suit that couldn't hide the nurse's warm, observant eyes. She greeted patients by name, her presence a calming reassurance. She was no longer just healing one person at a time. She was the guardian of a sanctuary, a place where the only question asked upon entry was, how can we help? Her financial worries were a distant memory, but the real wealth was the profound sense of purpose that radiated from her. In a sunlit corner of the room, Liam sat with a young girl who was waiting for her mother to finish a chemotherapy session. He was sketching her portrait, his movements fluid and confident, making her laugh as he exaggerated the size of her smile in his drawing. He was the foundation's artist in residence, his salary paid by his father, his purpose discovered in the place that had saved his life. He was using his unique gift to bring light and humanity into the often sterile and frightening world of medicine. He saw Anya and walked over to her new office, handing her a cup of coffee. Long day? He asked, their friendship now an easy, comfortable rhythm. A good day, she corrected him with a smile. Hanging on the wall behind her desk, in a simple, elegant frame, was a single charcoal drawing. It was the first one he had given her, the one he had sketched with a trembling hand in the recovery bay. It was a portrait of her from that first night, her face etched with exhaustion and worry, but with an unmistakable, unquenchable fire of determination in her eyes. Beneath it, a small, polished brass plaque read, "For Anya, who saw a person, not a problem." "It's still the best thing I've ever done," Liam said quietly, looking at the portrait. Anya turned in her chair and looked at the drawing, at the face of the woman she had been. The terrified, resolute nurse who had gambled everything on a single human life. She thought of the $8.42 that had once been her entire world. Her last $500 hadn't just bought a medical procedure. It had bought justice. It had rebuilt a family. It had forged a legacy of compassion that would echo in these halls for generations. It was, she realized with a quiet, triumphant smile, the best investment she had ever made.